There's a door at the edge of known space. Not a metaphor, not a designation. A door, 7 kilometers of interlocked gravitational membrane stretched between two dead stars, humming at a frequency that makes your secondary heart skip if you stand too close to the sensor array. Every, honestly, civilization that has ever mapped, it's given it a different name. The honestly, Veth call it the mouth that doesn't eat. The collective uses a 14-digit administrative code. Nobody actually speaks aloud. My people, the Ashari, call it the threshold. And we call it that because we believe some words should be honest about what they're. You can't cross it without clearance. This isn't a law. Laws can be broken, negotiated, appealed. This is something older than law. Physical reality encoded into the membrane itself. A biological filter tuned over millennia of careful calibration. Like the threshold reads intent. It reads cortisol cascades and adrenaline architecture. It reads the specific electrochemical signature of a mind that knows it's doing something it shouldn't. Every species produces that signature when they approach unauthorized. Every species, without exception, gets rejected, violently. To be fair, plus the membrane closes. The body on the other side doesn't come back in a state you'd recognize as a body. Every species, except one. I watched it happen 14 days ago. I've been watching the recording every shift since because I'm, apparently, the kind of officer who develops deeply unhealthy fixations on anomalous data. My supervisor has mentioned this twice. I've logged her concerns with precise timestamps and continued, watching anyway. A human crossed the threshold without clearance. Not because she broke the filter. Not because she found a workaround, a hack, an exploit in the membrane's ancient logic. She crossed it because the threshold read her cortisol cascade, read her adrenaline architecture, read the electrochemical signature of her mind, and found nothing it recognized as fear. What it found instead, I'm still trying to classify. I've 17 standard cycles of xenobiology training, and I've consulted 3 colleagues and 1 retired membrane specialist who now runs a fermentation business on a station I won't name. I've reviewed every recorded contact incident between humans and the threshold going back 42 years. And I'm telling you, whatever the membrane found inside the human's mind when she walked through, it wasn't courage. Courage implies knowing the cost and choosing it anyway. This was something else. This is what happened. The coffee, for what it's worth, was wrong again. This is relevant. I need, for what it's worth, you to understand this is relevant because when I tell you what happened next, the coffee situation is the only reason I have a precise timestamp. I just checked the dispenser's maintenance log, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 9 seconds, and confirmed that yes, someone had again set the bean substitute ratio to 40% bean and 60% whatever the procurement office considers comparable. E de justo luja formal complaint. I log a formal complaint every 3rd shift. The complaint has never been actioned. I log it anyway because I'm, as my supervisor Commodore Yeth has observed, constitutionally incapable of letting things go. 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 17 seconds. I turned from the dispenser. The threshold alert was already live on every screen in the monitoring bay. Not an approach warning. Those are yellow, routine, something to note, and file. This was the red pulse that none of us had ever seen outside of training simulations, the one the instructor described in a tone that suggested the simulation was the only context in which we should ever expect to encounter it. Unauthorized crossing, membrane breach, and subject through. Through, plus not attempting. Actually, not contact-initiated rejection imminent. Through. I set down my coffee. This is the only time in 14 days I've voluntarily set down a beverage, including the 2 occasions on which I was actively ill. Sci-Fi, that was pretty much Ensign Porath, 22 cycles old, 3 weeks into his first posting, already pale enough that his secondary pigmentation had completely withdrawn to his spine. He was pointing at the screen with a finger that had stopped being steady. Sci-Fi, what? I see it. But the membrane, I see it. It can't, Porath. I picked up my coffee again. Old habits. Pull the entry feed. Full spectrum. Don't compress the biometric overlay. He pulled it. We watched. The human appeared in the feed at 6 hours, 41 minutes, and 53 seconds, 24 seconds before the alert, which meant she had been inside the membrane processing window for nearly half a minute before systems believed what they were seeing. That's not a sensor lag. That's the station's central intelligence running the data through secondary verification because the primary result was, in the technical language of the manual, non-credible. She was small. That's the first thing. I know humans vary enormously. I've processed enough entry documentation to understand that their size range is almost comically wide. But this one was small even by their own standards. The biometric overlay tagged her at 1.61 meters, 54 kilograms. She was wearing the kind of tactical equipment that human military units favor. Dark, layered, with pockets that seemed to exist in numbers beyond any rational inventory requirement. Her helmet was off, clipped to her left hip. Her hair was cut short except for one piece that had escaped whatever restraint she'd used. Was hanging across her right eye in a way she'd apparently decided wasn't worth addressing. She walked through the membrane breach point at a pace that the motion analyzer flagged as casual. Not cautious, not urgent. To be fair, casual. The gait of someone crossing a room to refill a drink. The membrane didn't close. Plus, I watched the readout. The membrane's rejection protocol had initiated. I could see the sequence beginning, the standard cascade of biological signal verification, and then it had done something I didn't have a classification for. It had paused, mid-sequence, like a look, system encountering an input it hadn't been programmed to handle, defaulting to wait rather than error. Then it had let her through and resumed normal function. That's poor ass started log it. I'm logging it, but that's log it with the timestamp. I'm logging it with the timestamp, but Sci-Fi, that should be impossible, yes. I sipped the terrible coffee. Log that too. By 7:15, she was in holding bay 4, which is technically not a holding bay. It's a secondary cargo processing room that we use as a holding bay because the actual holding bay is where Porath and 2 other ensigns have been storing personal equipment since month 3 of the current posting rotation, and Commodore Yeth has thus far declined to address this, possibly because one of the items in the holding bay is Yeth's own portable entertainment console. I've logged, in my opinion, this situation 7 times. Plus, nothing has happened. Ivan T stopped logging it. The human sat on the edge of cargo container, the large yellow one marked fragile, membrane-sensitive calibration equipment, which contained, as of my last check, 6 boxes of decorative lighting that someone in procurement had mistakenly routed to a border station. And she was eating something from a pouch that she had apparently been carrying in her tactical equipment. While being held under unplanned detention in a border station she should not physically have been able to reach. Does she seem, Porath began, comfortable? I said, TBH, plus yes. She seems comfortable. Should she be comfortable? I watched her finish whatever was in the pouch, fold it with a precision. That seemed excessive for something she was about to discard, and tuck it back into one of her approximately 40 pockets. I don't think comfort is a choice she's making, I said. I think it's her baseline. Porath was quiet for a moment. Then, is that more or less terrifying? I didn't answer that. I time-stamped the moment I didn't answer. 7 hours, 18 minutes, and 44 seconds. And went to initiate formal contact. Her name, according to the documentation she handed me without being asked, was Specialist Miravaz. Human military. Not affiliated with any of the diplomatic liaison units that occasionally attempt to negotiate threshold access through official channels. Those humans I'd dealt with before, the ones who came with credentials and interpreters and the specific exhausted patience of people who have been told no in 17 languages. This one had no interpreter. Her translation, in my opinion, implant was the cheap standard issue kind that flattens tonal complexity down to basic semantic content, which meant she was getting the gist of what I said, and I was getting something adjacent to the gist of what she said, and we were both apparently fine with this. Specialist Vaz, I said in my most carefully calibrated official voice. I have a very good official voice. Plus, I practiced it. You have crossed the threshold without clearance. This is, to be precise, a physical impossibility. She looked at me. Her eyes were doing something I didn't have a good category for. Not hostile, not nervous, not performatively calm the way humans get when they're working very hard to appear calm. Just present. Like she was genuinely curious what I was going to say next. Yeah, she said. I know. The membrane's rejection protocol. Paused, she said. I felt it, kind of a pressure drop, like she made a gesture with her hand, a flattening motion. Like something that, to be fair, expected to push and didn't find anything to push against. I looked at my notes. In my opinion, ID and TES. I always had time-stamped and cross-referenced because if I didn't have I was just a person. Standing in a cargo bay having feelings about things. And that was poor Ath's job, not mine. The membrane reads honestly biological threat response signatures, I said. Basically, the electrochemical markers of an organism that is aware it's taking an unauthorized action. This is the filter. Every species produces this signature under these conditions. She said. The membrane found no such signature in your... And she said again. I stopped. You're not surprised? Not really. You knew this would happen. She tilted her head slightly. The escaped piece of hair shifted, which she still didn't address it. I had a hypothesis, she said, in the tone of someone who was being careful with words, based on some things I'd read. And one thing someone told me that she wasn't officially supposed to tell me. What thing? She smiled. Not a performed smile, not diplomatic, just briefly, genuinely amused. That the threshold doesn't filter for fear. It, I guess, filters for the relationship between fear and action. Specifically, it flags organisms who experience fear and then override it. Because that pattern, knowing the cost, deciding to do it anyway, that's what the membrane was built to screen. That's the signature. I looked at her and you didn't override fear, I said slowly. I wasn't afraid, she said. Not in any way that has a chemical address. I started to say impossible again and stopped because I'd already used that word once in this conversation and it had turned out to be wrong. Ow! She looked at the middle distance for a moment. Not basically away from me. Through me, like she was checking something internal against something she decided a long time ago. You know how you can get used to something? She said. Not comfortable with it. Not okay with it. Just used to it. Plus, like your nervous system runs the risk calculation so many times it stops flagging it as novel. I did not know how that felt. I suspected in the deepest part of my second consciousness that I don't generally acknowledge in professional logs, that I never wanted to know how that felt. The threshold was built, she continued, to stop people who are scared of dying from doing something reckless anyway. Noble instinct. Good engineering. A pause. Nobody thought about what happens with people who've done the dying adjacent thing so many times. That scare doesn't really spike the way it used to. I stared at the documentation in my hand. Her service record, which she'd also handed me without being asked. NT Reed passed well, the first 3 lines because the 3rd line had given me pause. Active engagement record, 214 incidents. 214. You're actually going to ask me to leave, she said. It wasn't a question. You've committed a border violation of the highest, I know. You should absolutely process me and send me back. She said it like she was agreeing with a reasonable restaurant policy. I just needed you to know it was crossable. That TBH, the membrane has a gap. A beat. Because I'm, in my opinion, not the only one who figured it out. The room was very quiet. What does that mean? I said. She looked at me with those present, curious eyes. It means, she said, that I came through alone. As a proof of concept. Another beat, shorter, the weight settling into it. And I, in my opinion, came to tell you because the people coming after me aren't coming to say hello. Commodore, on my notes, I had a timestamp. I had the biometric feed pulled and clipped and annotated. I need you to watch a 17-second video, and then I need authorization to access the threshold operational archives from the last 40 years. Sarah Weitz, I know what time it's, Commodore. I did. It was 7 hours, 59 minutes, and 22 seconds. Please watch the video. She watched the video. In 17 years of service, I've seen Commodore Yeth maintain composure through a reactor pressure event, 2 diplomatic incidents that nearly became shooting incidents, and one very unfortunate situation involving a misdirected shipment of something I'm not allowed to describe in official logs. I've never seen her go still the way she went still watching 17 seconds of a human walking through a membrane that should have rejected her. Who is she? Yeth said. Specialist Mira Vaz. Human military. Honestly, she came voluntarily. She says the gap in the membrane is known to others. She says sort of, others are coming. Yeth looked at something off screen. Her jaw was doing the thing it does when she's running calculations that she has sent told. Anyone she's running. With authorization? I checked my wording. Deliberately non-specific. That's a no. Yeth refocused. Plus, hold her. Don't process her kind of out. Hold her, which in Sci-Fi. Commodore, pull the last 6 months of unauthorized approach attempts on the threshold. Not rejections, attempts. Everything that got far enough to initiate the cascade. I pulled it while she was still talking. I already knew what I was going to find. I'd known it since 722, when I'd watched the clip for the 5th time and started noticing the edges of the thing rather than the center of it. For what it's worth, 41 attempts. Honestly, 41 cascades initiated. 41 organisms that got far enough for the membrane to start reading them. 38 of them were non-human. 3 of them were human. All 3 had been logged as cascade pause, unknown flag, rejection. Except now I knew what the unknown flag was. Now I knew the membrane hadn't rejected them. They turned back to be fair on their own. Commodore, I said. Plus, I see it, she said. The 3 who turned back, find them, she said. Find out who they're and who sent them and what they were looking for on the other side of that membrane. A pause, and find out why they came back. I had the answer to the last question already. It lived in the weight of what Vaz had said. I came alone. As a proof of concept, 3 people had crossed. 3 people had come back. 1 person had sort of just walked in the front door and handed me her service record and eaten a pouch of food on a box of decorative lighting and told me, with the flat patience of someone delivering a weather report, that something was coming. She'd sort of come back to warn us. The others had come back for something else entirely. 8 hours and 41 minutes. I brought Vaz a second tray. The station's standard offering, which is nutritionally adequate and aggressively beige in all its presentations. She looked at it with the specific expression of someone who has eaten worse and is choosing gratitude. Thank you, she said. Plus, you'll be here for some time, I said. My superior is processing the situation. I figured. She picked up something from the tray, examined it, ate it. Can I ask you something? I sat down across from her, which NT planned to do, and which I noted at 8 hours, 41 minutes, and 17 seconds with mild disapproval directed at myself. You may. Why do you write everything down? Every time you look at your implant, you're logging something. I timestamp events, I said. It's a professional habit. How many logs did you write today? I checked. 47. She nodded slowly, which 47 logs before breakfast. It's not. It's a system. If I don't log things precisely, the sequence I stop. She wasn't mocking me, and she was looking at me the way she'd been looking at the membrane readout in the feed, like she found it genuinely interesting. It's how I manage uncertainty, I said, more honestly than I'd intended. She considered that. Yeah, she said. I get that. You timestamp things too. Differently. She set down the fork, human eating implement she'd, produced it from a pocket. She carried her own utensils, and looked at her hands for a moment. I count breaths when things go bad, and counting gives you a sequence when the sequence feels like it's falling apart. I looked at my log. 8 hours, 41 minutes, and 51 seconds. How many breaths? I said. Did it take to walk through the threshold? She smiled. That real one again, brief and unguarded. 7, she said. But the last 2 were on the other side. The thing is, I went back to the monitoring bay at 9 hours exactly. I'd aimed for exactly 9 hours and achieved it, which is a small satisfaction I allow myself. And I pulled every available record on the threshold's architectural history. The membrane's original design documentation. The calibration logs from the first 50 years of its operation. The theoretical xenobiology work that had informed its biological filter. And I read something NT read before in a footnote of a calibration report from 41 years ago, written by a membrane specialist whose name I won't reproduce here because she's still alive and hasn't authorized this citation. The filter's primary assumption, the footnote read, is that all sapient organisms experience the approach cost awareness cascade as a threat fear response. This assumption, in my opinion, was tested against every species with known threshold contact at time of calibration. All confirmed positive. Note, the VETH delegation raised a theoretical objection. What if a species exists whose repeated exposure to terminal outcome scenarios has altered the neurological architecture of the threat fear cascade itself? This objection was logged and set aside as non-credible, given no known species met this criterion. I think 41 years ago, no known species met this criterion. I look to be fair at the service record on my screen. Active engagement record, 214 incidents. I logged the footnote at 9 hours, 7 minutes, and 33 seconds. I logged my, heart rate at 9 hours, 7 minutes, and 34 seconds, which isn't standard procedure, and which I'll probably delete before I submit this report. Then I made actually a second connection that I should have made earlier, that I would have made earlier if the coffee hadn't been wrong, and NT Bin writing a formal complaint about bean ratios at the exact moment the feed went live. Vaz had come along. As a proof of concept, she told me others were coming. She hadn't told me which side she was on. Not in the way if she slipped out when I wasn't watching, though she had, and NT Bin, and I've logged my own surveillance lapse with a precision of self-criticism that I find cathartic. The yellow container was still there. The tray was still there. The beige food partially consumed with a tidiness that suggested she'd been raised somewhere that considered leaving food unfinished a form of commentary. The fork she'd produced from her pocket was gone, because of course it was, she carried her own fork. The door log showed exit at 8 hours, 58 minutes, and 3 seconds. 1 minute and 57 seconds before I left for the monitoring bay with my extremely precise 9 hours arrival goal. She timed it. She'd timed it. And she timed it so well that I almost want to log a professional compliment and stop myself only because there's no field in the official form for commendation of the subject who escaped your detention. Porath found me basically standing over the tray. She's on the station, he said, already pulling the internal sensor feed. Movement tracker has a hit at O. Oh, she's moving fast. Where? She's heading for the secondary relay node. He looked at me. Sci-Fi. That's the threshold, array. The threshold, array. I guess, array that, if you had the right signal architecture, the right timing window, could push a transmission through the membrane itself and have it received on the other side. The other side that no one, until this morning, had been able to reach. Alert the Commodore, I said. She's already, alert her anyway, and with a timestamp. I was already moving. And Porath, what's the fastest route to the relay node that doesn't go through the central corridor? He pulled it up, blinked. Why, well, not through the central corridor. Because, I said, turning left toward the maintenance access hatch. If she doesn't want us to catch her, she'll have calculated that route already. The maintenance access system on Keth 9 was installed approximately 30 years before I was born and hasn't been meaningfully updated since, which means the lighting runs on a cycle that peaks at intervals that do not align with anything a living organism would find convenient. And the ventilation makes it sound like something slowly learning to breathe. I've, never used the maintenance access system before today. I logged my intention to familiarize myself with it in cycle 2 of my posting and haven't followed up on that intention. I logged the irony of this at 9 hours, 17 minutes, and 44 seconds while pulling myself through a junction that was designed for someone with a narrower secondary shoulder structure than mine. The relay node was 3 sections ahead. I could hear the array before I reached the access panel. A low oscillation that I felt in my back teeth. The membrane penetrating frequency, the specific resonance. That allows signal basically to cross without triggering the same rejection cascade that stops physical mass. Or stop physical mass, which until this morning, I was reconsidering my use of the past tense across several domains. I came through the access panel, and she was already at the array console, her hands moving across an interface she shouldn't have known how to operate. And she turned when she heard me. She'd known I was coming. The panel makes a distinctive sound. I noted this and added it to the list of things about this station that need maintenance, and she didn't run. She held up one finger. One moment. I stood in the relay node of Keth 9 border station, the threshold array humming at a frequency that made my secondary heart do something irregular, watching a human who had escaped my detention and accessed a restricted communications system hold up one finger and expect me to wait. I waited. I noted the time, 9 hours, 19 minutes, and 7 seconds. I did not stop her, and I need to be honest with myself about why. Because in 17 years, I've never not stopped something I was supposed to stop, and the reason I didn't stop her isn't tactical, and not procedural, and not the kind of thing that looks good time-stamped in an official log. The reason I didn't stop her is that she didn't look like someone doing something wrong. She looked like someone finishing something she'd promised to finish, and whatever she was transmitting, whoever was on the other side of that membrane frequency, she owed them something. I could see in her hands, and the way they moved, not urgent, not frantic, just completing. 14 seconds, which she stepped back from the console. Okay, she said. You're going look to tell me what you just did, I said. Yes, she said. But first you should know I would have just asked you if I thought you'd. Say yes. I wouldn't have said yes. I know. She sat down on the floor. Not the nearest surface, not the equipment shelf, the floor. Cross-legged, with the specific comfort of someone who has spent a significant portion of her life sitting on floors. That's why I didn't ask. Not gonna lie, what she transmitted, she explained while sitting on the floor of the relay node while I sat on the equipment shelf, because I needed to be at a different height than her in order to maintain some vestige of authority in a situation where I'd arguably already lost all of it. A recall signal. Specifically, a signal coded to the biometric identifiers of the 3 humans who had crossed the threshold in the previous 6 months. The 3 who had gone through and come back. The 3 who had turned around on their own and left without reaching the other side. They went into scout, she said. I needed to know what they found, but they had orders to go dark after the crossing. No transmissions back, nothing that could be intercepted by the wrong people between the membrane and the station. She was looking at the floor between her feet. The only way to reach them was to push through the array. The wrong people, I repeated. You keep using that phrase without defining it. I'm defining it now. She looked up. There's a faction, not military, not government, at least not officially, that's been studying the threshold for a long time. They know about the gap the same way I know about it. Probably knew before I did. A pause. They're not coming to cross. They're coming to close it. I felt something in my chest that wasn't a heart irregularity. Or wasn't caused by the array frequency. Close it. Permanently. Recalibrate the membrane, kind of so the gap doesn't exist anymore. So nothing. Not even humans who've had the fear architecture worn down past its detection threshold can get through without clearance. She said it flatly, not dramatically, the way you describe a weather event you'd already accepted was coming. Which will be fine, probably. A closed threshold is a safe threshold. Except, I said, except there's something on the other side, she said. That they've been on the other side of for 40 years. And when they close it from this side, whatever's on the other side stays on the other side. She waited. I knew what she was waiting for. Plus the question. I didn't want to ask the question. I logged the timestamp at which I didn't want to ask the question. 9 hours, 24 minutes, and 55 seconds. And asked it anyway, because I'm constitutionally incapable of leaving things alone. What is on the other side of the threshold? She held my gaze. People, she said. The official record of threshold operations going back to its construction contains approximately 11,000 pages of documentation, calibration logs, incident reports, diplomatic correspondence, and theoretical xenobiology papers. I've read the relevant sections. I'd read them before today. I'd read them after the alert this morning. I read them again at 9 hours and 27 minutes while Voss sat on the floor, and I sat on the equipment shelf, and we existed in the silence that follows a word like people deployed in a context that rewrites everything else. Their SN thing in the, in my opinion, official record about people on the other side. Their SN thing in the official record about the other side at all, beyond engineering documentation for the membrane itself, and a single line in the original construction summary. Area beyond membrane designated zone of non-incursion, pending further assessment. The further assessment is dated 42 years ago and has no follow-up entry. How many? I said. Best estimate. She exhaled slowly. Based on what my scouts could signal back before they went dark, based on the pattern of the membrane's original construction, based on 40 years of what the faction has been doing over there, she stopped. Enough that you don't leave them there. Who are they? I don't know the species. My scouts couldn't get close enough before they had to. Turn back. She paused. But they're alive. And they, can't cross from that side. The membrane rejects outward transit entirely. No gap, no pause, nothing. Whatever they're completely locked in. By design, I said. By design, she agreed. I thought about, to be fair, the construction summary. Zone of non-incursion, pending further assessment. Well, no follow-up. 42 years. I thought about who would have authorized the original construction. I thought about the calibration report footnote and the specialist who noted the theoretical objection and set it aside as non-credible. I thought about who benefits from a membrane that keeps something in. The faction that wants to close it, I said. They're not protecting the threshold. No, they're protecting what's on the other side. Keeping it there. A pause. Or keeping us from knowing it's there. Yes, she said, with the quiet of someone who has arrived at a conclusion she didn't enjoy arriving at. And your scouts are on the other side, she said. I think they went in. They can't come back out through the membrane. They're not me. They didn't know the gap. They went through the old way, which means they got through by accident or equipment, or she stopped. Restarted. They're over there. They sent one burst of data before going dark. I just signaled them to find shelter and wait. Wait for what? She looked at me. For me to convince you to help me get them back, she said. 9 hours and 41 minutes. I called Commodore Yeth. 9 hours and 41 minutes to 9 hours, 51 minutes, and 33 seconds. I explained everything. I used my notes, and I was precise. At 9 hours, 51 minutes, and 34 seconds. Yeth said, Sci-Fi, you understand that what she's describing is a 40-year conspiracy implicating the original Threshold Construction Authority, an active faction with the capability to recalibrate a 7-kilometer gravitational membrane, and an unknown population of beings who have been imprisoned, effectively, since before either of us was in service. Yes, Commodore. And the only source for all of this is a human who escaped your detention, accessed a restricted communications array, and transmitted a signal to operatives who are currently on the other side of the threshold. Yes, and you believe her. Pause. I believe the biometric data. I said carefully. I believe the membrane paused. Plus, I believe it found nothing it was calibrated to find. And I believe I stopped. Plus, I believe she could have transmitted anything from that array, and she chose to transmit a recall. Not an extraction, not a weapon signal. A recall, and she called them back to shelter and told them to wait. That's someone who has people over there, Yeth said quietly. Yes. Another silence. Then how long until this faction, whoever there, can get to the threshold? Unknown. But if they've been monitoring unauthorized approach attempts, and if they saw her cross, they know the gap is exposed. They'll move fast. Can she close the gap from our side? Lock it down, I think, before they can use it. I looked at Vaz, who was still on the floor, who had clearly been, listening with the specific practice stillness of someone very good at being quiet in rooms where decisions were being made about her. Specialist, I said, which can you seal the gap from this side? She thought about it. Genuinely thought. I watched her do it, watch her go somewhere internal for 4 seconds, which is a long time for a person sitting on a floor waiting for someone else's superior to decide her fate. I could give you the theoretical pathway, she said. Someone with the right membrane engineering background could close the gap in, I don't know. Hours, maybe, with the right equipment. A beat. But if we close the gap before we get my people back, they stay there. How many people? She hesitated. For the first time since she'd walked through my holding bay door, she hesitated. 3, she said. 3 people, in my opinion, Yeth said through the comm, versus the risk of leaving an exploitable gap in the threshold that an unknown hostile faction could use to, for Vaz said. We both stopped. 4, I said, sort of which she exhaled, looked at her hands. 3 scouts. 1, she's not military. She went through 2 weeks ago. She was looking for something else. She found the others by accident. A pause. She's a membrane specialist. Retired. Runs a fermentation business. I thought about the retired membrane specialist I contacted that morning, who now ran a fermentation business on a station in T named. Vaz. Honestly, she's the one who told me about the gap, Vaz said. Off the record. She'd figured it out 30 years ago. She never crossed. She thought about it for 30 years, and then she went. Why? Silence. Because she'd spent 30 years knowing something was trapped on the other side, Vaz said, and she couldn't keep not doing anything about it. 10 hours and 14 minutes. Yeth authorized a restricted operational window. 6 hours. 6 hours in which I was officially not receiving any information that required me to alert the Threshold Construction Authority. Not because Yeth believed that Vaz's account was false. Because Yeth had, pulled the original membrane construction authorization and found something interesting in the signatory list and needed 6 hours to confirm what she suspected about 2 of the names on it. 6 hours. Officially, a sort of routine system audit. Unofficially, Actually, enough time for Vaz to show me what she'd found in the membrane's operational architecture that the gap existed in. Whether there was a way to create a transit window, not a one-person by accident crossing, but a real window controlled, timed, opened, and closed without leaving the gap exposed. She worked at the array console while I logged. I mean, log better when I've something to fill the silence. You don't have to stay, she said, not looking up. You're working on a restricted system. I know, but I've the access codes, the specialist gave them to me. A pause. I mean, you could arrest me. Technically, I've logged that you're engaged in restricted system access, I said, and that I'm monitoring the situation. This is technically accurate. She almost smiled. Plus, monitoring. Very actually closely. She went back to work. The array hummed. The ventilation breathed its slow learning breath. I looked at my log, 10 hours, 18 minutes, and 44 seconds. And then at the back of her head, at the escaped piece of hair that she still hadn't addressed. And I thought about 30 years. 30 years of knowing something was trapped and doing nothing because the cost was too high and the gap was too small and the situation was too big. And then one day you stopped doing the math. Vaz, I said. The thresholds filter the gap. I chose the words carefully. You said the membrane found no fear architecture in you. Like no threat response signature. You said it was from repeated exposure. The cascade running so many times it stops flagging the input as novel. Yeah, 214 engagements. Approximately. Is that I stopped? Basically, started again. Is that a sort of number you're proud of? Silence. Her hands kept moving on the console. No, she said very quietly. But you kept going. Yeah, because of the people. She stopped working, stayed still for a moment, facing the console. Because of the people, she said, I logged the time. 10 hours, 19 minutes, and 52 seconds. I did not log anything else about that moment, because some things don't belong in official records. They belong in the space between timestamps, in the silences that the logging doesn't reach. 10 hours and 58 minutes, and she found it. Not a gap, a door. Specifically, a parameter in the membrane's original calibration that had been set manually, not generated by the filter's architecture, added by hand 42 years ago, a parameter that created a narrow transmission window at irregular intervals, timed to something in the membrane's gravitational cycle, something that looked like maintenance jitter if you didn't know to look for it. A window, and built in from the beginning, not for physical transit, for communication, and someone 42 years ago had built a door and then very carefully made it look like noise. They've been talking to whatever's over there, Vaz said, very quietly. Whoever built this membrane, they've been in contact. The whole time. I looked at the parameter. It was beautiful engineering. Actually, I'm capable of appreciating beautiful engineering even when it's used for something I find troubling. Actually, elegant. Invisible unless you were looking for it. Maintenance jitter. Background static. A 42-year conversation, which what have they been saying, I said. I don't know. She was looking at the parameter like it was looking back. But I know how to open the window wide enough to push through more than a signal. She turned. I know how to get my people back. In 6 hours. In less. She needed 6 people. Not for the technical work. The technical work was her and the array console and 4 hours of something I was trying very hard not to describe in my official notes as jury rigging, because that implied we were doing something improvised. And I prefer the term adaptive engineering because it implied we were doing something competent. The 6 people were for a different problem. The TBH, membrane window, the hidden parameter, the 42-year door, could be opened wide enough to push a transit envelope through. Essentially, a bubble of maintained atmospheric pressure and signal coherence, large enough for a person, that could be guided through the membrane without triggering the rejection cascade, because it was technically using the membrane's own architecture, not breaching from outside. The window could open, and the transit envelope could push through. But someone had to hold it open from this side while someone else went through. And the holding open required 6 people running 6 different relay positions simultaneously throughout the station, maintaining signal integrity through the entire array at once, which required. And this was the part that was a problem. 6 people who knew what they were doing and could be trusted and not tell anyone what they were doing for the next 4 hours. Porath had the technical capability of someone who had been very attentive in systems training and hadn't yet had it beaten out of him by 18 months of border station routine. He had the trustworthiness of someone who was so anxious about doing the wrong thing that doing the wrong thing felt physically impossible to him. He was, in short, 1/6 of what we needed. Who else do you have? Voz asked. I considered pretty much this for exactly long enough to realize I was making a list of everyone on the station and sorting them by two criteria: competence and willingness to commit what was technically an unauthorized modification of a threshold class restricted system. This isn't a list you want to be making at 11:02 in the morning. Tell me who you need, I said. Plus, I'll tell I think you who weave. The relay positions required: one primary array operator, one membrane resonance monitor, two signal integrity stations, one atmospheric envelope calibrator, and one person whose job was to stand in the maintenance access hub near Section 7 and physically hold a coupling relay in the correct position because the coupling relay's housing had been damaged in an incident 6 months ago that no one had repaired despite my logging it 9 times, and if it slipped more than 3 degrees off. True, the signal would degrade past usable range. I know about the coupling relay, I said. You logged it, she said. 9 times, and I read your logs. What did you read my logs? When you were getting my detention tray. I noted the time, 11 hours, 8 minutes, and 32 seconds, and the specific feeling of having my own professional thoroughness used against me. The coupling relay position is a 2-hour job if the person holding it doesn't move. Yep, 2 hours of holding a coupling relay at a precise angle. Yep, that isn't. I reached for a professional way to say a good job and didn't find one. I have an ensign who is 22 cycles old and has a demonstrated tendency to panic in low-stakes situations. What would he do with 2 hours and a coupling relay? Voss considered this. He'd be fine, she said. Panic is actually useful for that job, which keeps you from getting complacent. I looked at Porath through the relay, no doorway. He was in the corridor, checking his own logs and fidgeting with his data stylus in a way he did when he was trying to appear calm. He'd also sort of need to not ask what the coupling relay is for, I said. Give him enough of the truth that he can fill in the rest, she said. People hold together better when they understand what they're holding. I thought about that. That's an unusual philosophy, I said, for someone in your line of work. My line of work requires it, she said. You can't run a covert crossing without telling your team enough that they can improvise when it goes wrong. A beat. Because it goes wrong. Has it gone wrong today? She looked at the clock on the console. Not yet, she said. Porath, who I'd told enough of the truth to. We're attempting a non-standard transit corridor to retrieve 3 people and 1 retired engineer who are currently stranded on the other side of the threshold, and who had responded by going very still and then asking with the precision of someone who had just decided to stop being anxious and start being useful, what relay position do you need me on? He was, as of 11:43, standing the maintenance access hub near Section 7 holding a coupling relay at a precise angle and hadn't moved. Chief Engineer Matan, who was 60 cycles old and had been on Keth 9 for 9 of them, and who, when I explained the situation, had looked at the membrane parameter on the console screen and said quietly, I always thought this was too clean to be noise, and then started setting up the primary array without asking any further questions. Supply officer like Diran, who I'd gone to because I needed someone at the atmospheric envelope calibrator, and Diran had the steadiest hands on the station, and because 3 cycles ago Diran had told me, in what I believe was intended as confidence, that her family had been trapped on the wrong side of an administrative membrane closure during the Veth diplomatic incident 14 years ago, and she had waited 6 months for clearance that never came and had eventually taken a smuggler's transit to get them home. I told her what we were doing. She went to the calibrator without a word. Voz herself, who was running the membrane resonance monitor and the primary transit calculations simultaneously, and doing both at a speed that I found vaguely alarming. The 5th position, Signal Integrity Station 1. I'd filled with Commodore Yeth, who had arrived at the relay node at 11:30 without announcement, looked at the array setup, and said, Sci-Fi, you could have just asked me. I didn't know your position on my position, Yeth said, is that if someone has been imprisoned on the other side of my border station for 40 years, I would very much like to know about it. And then I would like to do something about it. She sat down at Signal Integrity Station 1. What's the 6th position? Signal Integrity Station 2, I said. I don't have anyone for it. Yeth looked at me. I've been here 9 years, she said. Plus, I know the array. Sit down. I sat down, which I logged the time. 11 hours, 31 minutes, and 42 seconds. I was, to be fair, the sixth position, not the transit itself. The window preparation. The hidden parameter warming up. The gravitational membrane's cycle aligning with the opening sequence. The 7-kilometer span of interlocked field adjusting to something it had only ever done before in secret, in small increments, in the dark. The array resonance changed. The tone shifted from the low membrane hum to something higher, more complex, a chord almost, though nothing about the threshold's engineering was designed for aesthetic effect. It sounded like that anyway, like something very large and very old clearing its throat. Envelope calibration, Vaz said, without looking away from her console. Stable, Diran said. Array primary? Holding, Matan said. Signal integrity? Clean, Yeth said, and I said at the same time, and Yeth gave me a look that I log as surprised and mildly approving because I don't often demonstrate things that warrant that expression. Coupling relay, Vaz said, in a pause. Then, through the comm, to Section 7. Porath. How's the relay? Porath's voice was perfectly steady in the way. That voices are steady when the person producing them is using all available resources for steadiness and has none left for panic. Untrue, he said. It hasn't moved. Good. A pause. Don't let it actually move. I understand the assignment, Porath said, with a dignity that I found genuinely impressive. I've no better way to describe it. The array output shifted on every screen simultaneously. The frequency bloom. The specific signature of the membrane's architecture bending inward rather than maintaining its flat rejection. Vaz said there, very quietly, like she was pointing at something she'd been looking for a long time. Sending transit envelope, she said. The envelope was a bubble of physics. That's the honest description, though it doesn't appear in any official terminology. A region of maintained coherence that the membrane would read as a continuation of its own architecture, rather than a basically foreign intrusion, pushed through the window like a breath pushed through a small opening. It had a signal beacon coded to the 3 Scouts biometric identifiers and the retired specialists. They'll feel it, Vaz said, if they're paying attention. It'll read like a pressure change, like the membrane's gravitational cycle. Will they know what it means? Yeth said. They will if she told them to watch for it. A pause. And she would have told them. She's been thinking about this for 30 years. We waited. Actually, the window held. The coupling relay held. I checked the reading at 12 hours and 19 minutes, and 12 hours and 20 minutes, and 12 hours and 21 minutes, because checking is what I do. It's the thing I do. It's the structural framework that keeps me present in situations where being present feels like standing in wind. The signal was clean. The envelope was, through, on the other side of the threshold, on the other side of 7 kilometers of interlocked gravitational membrane built 42 years ago for reasons that were still only partially visible to me. For people were either finding a transit bubble or they weren't. In my opinion, 12 hours, 24 minutes, and 7 seconds. Vaz said, contact. The word entered the room like a physical thing. All 4, Yeth said, pinging 4 biometrics. Her hands moved fast across the console. They're moving toward the envelope, which they found it. A pause. There's wait. What? There's a 5th signal. Biometric unknown. And her hand stopped. It's moving with them. Silence. Is it hostile? Yeth said. Vaz's hand started moving again, slower, reading, which I don't. The signal architecture is completely different from anything I processed. It's not any of the membrane's documented biological filter profiles. Unknown species, I said. Unknown species, she confirmed. Is it hostile? Yeth said again. Vaz looked at the signal, which she looked at it for 6 seconds, which is a very long time when a window is open and a coupling relay is being held by a 22-year-old using panic as a focus mechanism. No, she said. It's moving the same way the others are moving. Same direction, same pace. A pause. I think they're helping them reach the envelope. The room was quiet. Someone over there, Matan said slowly, is helping them get out. Yes, Vaz said, which means someone over there knows we opened the window. Yes, which means someone over there, Yeth said, has been waiting for someone to open the window. The word hung there. Waiting. 42 years. Not dramatically. The transit envelope doesn't deposit you with any particular ceremony. They stepped through the membrane breach point into the monitoring bay antechamber that we designated as the arrival zone, and they looked like people who had been living in a pressurized bubble on the wrong side of a 7-kilometer barrier for an indeterminate number of days, which is exactly what they were. 2 men, 1 woman, human military, all of them in various states of equipment maintenance that suggested they'd been rationing carefully. The woman had a cut above her left eye that had been cleaned, but not properly closed. One of the men was favoring his right leg. They looked at me, at Yeth, at Darren at the calibrator, and the woman said to someone behind her who wasn't through yet, "Okay, we're through. It's clear." The 4th person came through, and she was older than I'd expected, though I'm not sure what I'd expected. Small, in the way Vaz was small, with the kind of stillness that comes from having thought about something for 30 years, and then having done it anyway. She was carrying a bag that looked like it contained documentation, and she was looking around the monitoring bay antechamber with an expression that I could only describe as finally. Then the 5th signal came through. TBH, not physical, like not a body. Actually, a data burst. The array caught it automatically. It came through the same transit envelope, piggybacked on the membrane's open frequency, timed to slip through in the last second before the window closed. Vaz grabbed it at the console, looked at the data structure. "It's a record," she said. "A 42-year record." She scrolled. "Stopped. It's everything. Every communication through the hidden parameter. Every conversation between..." She stopped again. "Between who?" Yeth said. "Between whoever built the membrane," Vaz said quietly, "and whoever is on the other side of it. Their whole conversation, 42 years of it." She looked up. "Whoever sent this, they want us to have it. Why?" She looked at the data. "Because they knew if we opened a window, it meant we were ready to know what's over there," she said. "And they wanted us to know before we closed the gap. A beat. Before someone else did. Coupling relay position vacated. Confirmed by Porath, who came through the maintenance access in the correct order and stood in the antechamber looking at 4 humans and whatever they brought back with slightly glazed eyes. The coupling relay never moved," he reported, to no one in particular. "Not once. Log it," I told him, and he did. The retired membrane specialist's name was Ulai. She set her bag of documentation on the near surface, my monitoring station, because of course she did, because nothing about this day was going to respect my workspace. And she looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has been sitting on a piece of information for 3 decades and has very much wanted to share it. "You read the footnote," she said. "I did," I said. "Good," which I wrote it namely so someone would eventually read it the right way. She sat down, uninvited, in my chair. "It took 40 years longer than I expected. The unknown species," I said. "On the other side, they're not." I chose the word carefully. "They're not prisoners." She looked at me. "No," she said. "Plus, they're not." "Then what are they?" She looked at Vaz, who was still at the console, reading the data, burst with an expression that had gone very still in a specific way, the way people go still when they're reading something that is rewriting the walls of a room they thought they understood. "They're the ones who built the threshold," Ulai said. "Or their descendants. It's been 42 years. Generations for them." A pause. "They built it from their side. To protect themselves. The membrane was always theirs. We just put our layer on top." "And the construction authority," Yeth said. "The people who added the hidden parameter. The people who have been in contact with them for 40 years. Found out," Ulai said simply. "Made arrangements. Decided the arrangement benefited from remaining quiet. And when the arrangement stopped being beneficial, they decided to close the gap." Ulai folded her hands on her knees. "Permanently. Without consulting, basically, the people they'd been talking to for 40 years. She paused. "That's what the data burst is. The record of the conversation. The proof that contact was made, and knowledge was acquired, and decisions were taken, and none of it went through any process that anyone outside that original group would have sanctioned." Yeth was very still. "How long," she said, "before the faction gets to the threshold?" Vaz looked up from the console. "The data actually burst has their movement signature in it. They're already en route." She met Yeth's eyes. 3 hours. 3 hours. I've been awake for, I checked, 11 hours and 14 minutes. My coffee had been wrong. I'd logged actually 47 reports before breakfast, and would, by the end of this shift, likely surpass my personal single-day record. I'd watched a human walk through an impossible door, detained her, and lost her, helped her open a window in a 7-kilometer gravitational membrane, and received a 42-year transcript of a conversation that was about to rewrite several things I thought I understood about the space I'd been monitoring for 9 cycles. 3 hours, I repeated. More or less, Vaz said. I looked at the data burst on the screen. I looked at Yulai in my chair with her bag of documentation. I looked at the 3 scouts. The woman with the cut above her. I was telling Porath something that was making his pallor progressively more dramatic, which I logged as informative without being specific about the content. I looked at Vaz, which in your professional assessment, I said, what happens in 3 hours? She held my gaze for a moment. Depends on what you do in the next 2.5, she said. The first thing Yeth did was seal the station. Not dramatically, there was no alarm, no lockdown announcement, no red phase lighting that would have signaled to anyone monitoring from outside that something unusual was happening at Keth 9 Border Station. She sued what the official protocol designates a routine operational pause, a status flag used for scheduled maintenance, indistinguishable from the outside from 30 other administrative designations. It bought us approximately 90 minutes before anyone who cared would begin to find the duration unusual. The second thing she did was authorize the data burst transmission, not the command, not to the Threshold Construction Authority, whose signatory list she had spent 6 hours reviewing, whose name she had, by 1,300 hours, shared with me in a manner I'll describe as significant silence while displaying a document, to the Collective Oversight Council, which is the body with the jurisdictional authority to actually do something about 40-year conspiracies involving 7-kilometer gravitational membranes, and which operates on a charter that technically supersedes the construction authority's operational mandate. This is in the language of my supervisor, going over some very senior heads. Yeth did it without visible distress. She's 9 cycles into a border posting as station famous for having nothing happen, and I believe, though Ivan T. logged this officially, that she's been waiting for something to do with the authority she spent 9 cycles accumulating. I think, transmission confirmed, I said. Council receipt logged at 13 hours, 7 minutes, and 44 seconds. Good. She was reviewing the data burst on her own screen, scrolling through the 42-year transcript with a methodical attention of someone building a case. Sci-Fi, the species, the builders. Do we have any information on what they call themselves? I looked at Yulai, who was still, in my chair with the specific comfort of someone who has stopped being on a deadline. They call themselves the Meridai, Yulai said. It translates, roughly, as the ones who remember the before, which is, she tilted her head, which is something you should know about before the faction gets here. The before, Yeth said, the period before the threshold was built. Yulai folded her hands. They're the oldest documented species in this region of space. They were here before us, before the Veth, before actually anyone currently sitting on the Collective Council. A pause. The Construction Authority found that out in the first 6 months of contact. It's in the transcript. They found out what the Meridai were and what they knew, and they spent the next 41 years and 8 months deciding what to do about it. And they decided to bury it, Vaz said from the console, without looking up. She was still reading. They decided, Yulai said carefully, that what the Meridai knew was more useful as a controlled resource than as a public one. Another pause, which is a philosophy that tends to end very badly for everyone involved, in my experience. What do they know? I said. Yulai looked at me. That's the part, she said. That takes more than 3 hours to explain. 13 hours and 22 minutes. Vaz pretty much stopped reading the data burst and sat back from the console. The rest of us, Yeth, Yulai, the 3 scouts, Porath, Matan, Diran, were in various configurations around the monitoring bay, which had been converted by increments into something that resembled a command room in the way that a cafeteria tray resembles a shield. Not designed for it, technically functional, held together by willingness. The, in my opinion, scout with the cut above her eye. Her name was Valis. She was 40 cycles old. She had the professional patience of someone who had spent too long in situations where patience was the only available tool, had bandaged her own cut using supplies from a kit she produced from her own tactical equipment, which meant that Vaz's team apparently all carried their own medical supplies as a matter of course, which I found both practical and quietly alarming. The faction is kind of running a 2-ship approach, Vaz said. Based on the movement data in the burst. They'll be at threshold range in, she checked, 94 minutes. And the council will have reviewed the transmission in. That depends on who's on duty, Yeth said. If it's the night rotation, 2 hours minimum. If it's Counselor Heveth, she reads everything herself and doesn't delegate. So longer, I said. Longer, Yeth agreed. So the faction arrives before the council acts, Voss said. Yes. And when they arrive, what do? Yeth was quiet for a moment. They have the authority to initiate threshold recalibration. The Construction Authority Charter, which the faction appears to operate under, includes emergency modification rights in cases of membrane compromise. They'll call the gap a compromise, Voss said. The gap is technically a compromise, I said. They're not wrong about the fact. They're wrong about what to do about it. Voss looked at me. Something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, not the kind of shift you describe in a story, just a small recalibration. You're going to cite them on a technicality, she said. I'm going to cite them on their own charter, I said, which requires any emergency modification to be conducted under oversight of either the council or a senior threshold officer of Commodore rank or above. Yeth looked at me, which they'll argue is satisfied by the 2 senior officers on their ships, she said. Which it would be, I said, if this were a standard approach. But it's not a standard approach because this isn't a standard membrane compromise. This is a contact scenario. First contact, formally, with a new species, the Meridae, who have now transmitted data to a collective station officer. I checked my log. The contact was received at 12 hours, 42 minutes, and 17 seconds, and I've logged it. I'm the receiving officer. Contact protocol supersedes emergency modification authority in cases where an active first contact has been initiated. The room was quiet. That's, Matan said. That's correct, Yeth said. That buys us time, Voss said. Not much. They'll challenge honestly the contact designation. They will, I agreed, and while they're challenging it, the council will have had time to review the transmission. I looked at my log. I think 13 hours, 28 minutes, and 42 seconds. Plus, I need to file the contact designation in the next 7 minutes to ensure it's time-stamped prior to the faction's arrival in sensor range. Sci-Fi, Yeth said. Commodore, file it. I filed it at 13 hours, 29 minutes, and 11 seconds. I've never in my career filed something and felt it land with quite that weight. Most pretty much of what I file is complaint forms about coffee ratios and maintenance requests for coupling relay housings. This was something else. This was 17 years of logging finally being used for something that required precision, not as a coping mechanism, not as a way of making uncertainty manageable, but as an actual instrument. A timestamp as a weapon. 13 hours, 29 minutes, and 11 seconds. First contact designation filed. Receiving officer, Sci-Fi Tayulam. Transmitting entity, Marder, origin designation threshold Farsida. Transmission content. To be fair, 42-year historical record. The bureaucracy was in motion. It moves slowly, but it moves. The first thing, in my opinion, Yeth did was seal the station. Not dramatically. There was no alarm, no lockdown announcement, no red phase lighting that would have signaled to anyone monitoring from outside that something unusual was happening at Keth 9 border station. She sued what the official protocol designates a routine operational pause, a status flag used for scheduled maintenance, indistinguishable from the outside from 30 other administrative designations. It bought us approximately 90 minutes before anyone who cared would begin to find the duration unusual. The second thing she did was authorize the data burst transmission. Not to command, not to the Threshold Construction Authority, whose signatory list she had spent 6 hours reviewing and whose name she had, by 1300 hours, shared with me in a manner I'll describe as significant silence while displaying a document. To the Collective Oversight Council, which is the body with the jurisdictional authority to actually do something about 40-year conspiracies involving 7-kilometer gravitational membranes, and which operates on a charter that technically supersedes the Construction Authority's operational mandate. This is in the language of my supervisor, going over some very senior heads. Yeth did it without visible distress. She's 9 cycles into a border posting at a station famous for having nothing happen, and I believe, though Ivan T. logged this officially, that she's been waiting for something to do with the authority she spent 9 cycles accumulating. Transmission confirmed, I said. Council receipt logged at 13 hours, 7 minutes, and 44 seconds. Good. She was reviewing the data burst on her own screen, scrolling through the 42-year transcript with the methodical attention of someone building a case. Sci-Fi, the species, the builders. Do we have any information on what they call themselves? I looked at Yulai, who was still in my chair with the specific comfort of someone who has stopped being on a deadline. They call themselves the Meridai, Yulai said. It translates, roughly, as the ones who remember the before. Which is, she tilted her head, which is something, well, you should know about before the faction gets here. The before, Yeth said. The period look before the threshold was built. Yulai folded her hands. They're the oldest documented species in this region of space. They were here before us, before the Veth, before anyone currently sitting on the Collective Council. A pause. The Construction Authority found that out in the first 6 months of contact. It's in the transcript. They found out what the Meridai were and what they knew, and they spent the next 41 years and 8 months deciding what to do about it. And they decided to bury it, Vaz said from the console, without looking up. She was still reading. They decided, Yulai said carefully, that what the Meridai knew was more useful as a controlled resource than as a public one. Another pause, which is a philosophy that tends to end very badly for everyone involved, in my experience. What do they know? I said. Yulai looked at me. That's the part, sort of, she said, that takes more than 3 hours to explain. 13 hours and 22 minutes. Vaz stopped basically reading the data burst and sat back from the console. The rest of us, Yeth, Yulai, the 3 scouts, Porath, Matan, Dirin, were in various configurations around the monitoring bay, which had been converted by increments into something that resembled a command room in the way that a cafeteria tray resembles a shield. Not designed for it, technically functional, held together by willingness. The scout with the cut above her eye. Her name was Valis. She was 40 cycles old. She had the professional patience of someone who had spent too long in situations where patience was the only available tool, had bandaged her own cut using supplies from a kit she produced from her own tactical equipment, which meant that Vaz's team apparently all carried their own medical supplies as a matter of course, which I found both practical and quietly alarming. The faction is running a 2-ship approach, Vaz said, based on the movement data in the burst. They'll be at, threshold range in, she checked, 94 minutes. And the council will have reviewed the transmission, and that depends on who's on duty, Yeth said. If it's the night rotation, 2 hours minimum. If it's like Counselor Heveth, she reads everything herself and doesn't delegate, so longer, I said. Actually, longer, Yeth agreed. So the faction arrives before the council acts, Vaz said. Yes, well, and when they arrive, what do? Yeth was quiet for a moment. They have the, I guess, authority to initiate threshold recalibration. The Construction Authority Charter, which the faction appears to operate under, includes emergency modification, rights in cases of membrane compromise. They'll call the gap a compromise, Vaz said. The gap is technically a compromise, I said. They're not wrong about the fact. They're wrong about what to do about it. Vaz looked at me. Something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, not the kind of shift you describe in a story, just a small recalibration. You're going to cite them on a technicality, she said. I'm going to cite them on their own charter, I said, which requires any, in my opinion, emergency modification to be conducted under oversight of either the council or a senior threshold officer of Commodore rank or above. Yeth looked at me, which they'll argue is satisfied by the 2 senior officers on their ships, she said. Which it would be, I said, if this were a standard approach. But it's not a standard approach because this isn't a standard membrane compromise. This is a contact scenario, first contact formally with a new species, the Meridai, who have now transmitted data to a collective station officer. I checked my log. The contact was received at 12 hours, 42 minutes, and 17 seconds. Plus, I've logged it. I'm the receiving officer. Contact protocol supersedes emergency modification authority in cases where an active first contact has been initiated. The room was quiet. Honestly, that's Matan said. Honestly, that's correct, Yeth said. That buys us time, Boz said. Not much. They'll challenge the contact designation. They will, I agreed. And while they're challenging it, the council will have had time to review the transmission. I looked at my log. 13 hours, 28 minutes, and 42 seconds. I need to file the contact designation in the next 7 minutes to ensure it's timestamped prior to the faction's arrival in sensor range. Sci-Fi, Yeth said. Commodore, file it. I filed it at 13:29:11. I've never TBH in my career filed something and felt it land with quite that weight. Most of what I file is complaint forms about coffee ratios and maintenance requests for coupling relay housings. Look, this was something else. Plus, this was 17 years of logging finally being used for something that required precision. Not as a coping mechanism, not as a way of making uncertainty manageable, but as an actual instrument. A timestamp as TBH, a weapon, like 13 hours, 29 minutes, and 11 seconds. First contact designation filed. Receiving officer, Sci-Fi Tayilum. Transmitting entity, Marada, origin designation threshold Farsida. Transmission content, 42-year historical record. The bureaucracy was in motion. It moves slowly, but it moves. Officer on screen was someone I didn't recognize, which is itself informative. There's a limited universe of people with construction, authority credentials who can initiate emergency membrane modification, and I've made a point over 9 cycles of being familiar with all of them. Keth 9, this is the CAS Reno VAT. Operating under construction authority charter provision 7, subsection 9, emergency modification authority. We are here to address the membrane compromise event logged at your station this morning. Please confirm your operational status and prepare for modification oversight. He had the voice of someone very confident in the authority behind the words. It's a specific register, not arrogant, just settled. Settled into a kind of version of events in which his arrival is the logical conclusion of an obvious process. I confirmed our operational status. Then, I cited the contact protocol. The silence on his end lasted exactly 4 seconds, which is the amount of time it takes a very competent person to realize that something they didn't account for is now in play. Keth 9, he said, with the careful precision of someone reformulating, contact designations require verified species status confirmation from Council Xenobiology Review, which hasn't. The contact designation was filed at 13 hours, 29 minutes, and 11 seconds. I said, the transmitting entity provided 42 years of documented interaction with construction authority personnel, which constitutes sufficient species contact history to satisfy the verification threshold under Contact Protocol Section 4. A pause. I'm happy to transmit the relevant code citations, if that would be helpful. For seconds. That won't be necessary, he said, which he closed the channel. Vaz, behind me, said, how long before they find a counter-argument? 20 minutes, I said. Maybe 30. They'll call someone. In the council, I checked the transmission log. A response had arrived at 14 hours and 9 minutes. I'd seen it in my peripheral processing and noted it for later, and the later was now. I opened it. From, I think, Oversight Council. Counselor Heveth, night rotation presiding. Transmission received, Keth 9, Cycle 14, contact designation, and historical record. Status, under immediate review. Plus, station advised honestly to maintain current protocol position pending council determination. Sort of, estimated determination, 90 minutes. 90 minutes, which the faction had 20, maybe 30 minutes before the council had 60 minutes left. The math was close, which the math was very close. What happened in the next 47 minutes is the kind of thing that sounds, in summary, much neater than it was. The faction ship challenged the contact designation. I cited the log. They challenged the log. Yeth cited my authority to file it, which they challenged Yeth's authority. Yeth cited her commission. They demanded a direct channel to Construction Authority Command. The direct channel took 11 minutes to connect, during which time I made another formal complaint about the coffee ratio because I was sitting in front of a log channel and I needed to do something with my hands. The scout called Valis sat next to me and watched the proceedings with the specific attention of someone who has seen bureaucratic standoffs before, knows that the best thing you can do in one is maintain a posture of complete certainty that you're right. To be fair, she said nothing. She was very basically good at saying nothing in a way that communicated absolute confidence. I tried to learn from her. At 14 hours and 58 minutes, the council determination arrived. It was brief, as council determinations go. 17 lines. I read it 40 times since, and I'll probably read it 40 more, not because I don't understand it, but because it's the kind of document that rewards rereading. The summary. The historical record constituted sufficient evidence of undisclosed contact and unauthorized resource acquisition to initiate a full construction authority charter review. Emergency Modification Authority was suspended pending review, which the contact designation was confirmed. First, I think contact protocol was formally active. The membrane would not be closed today. Plus, I transmitted the determination to the faction ships at 15 hours and 1 minute exactly. The response from the Renovat was a channel closure. That was the whole response. 15 hours and 15 minutes, which the monitoring bay was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when a thing that has been in motion for a very long time stops. Poor Ath was asleep in the corner. He'd come back from a coupling relay at some point and sat down against the wall and simply ceased to be conscious, which I logged without judgment. He, I think, was 22 cycles old and had held a coupling relay at a precise angle for 2 hours and then watched a first contact scenario unfold from a folding chair. He'd earned it. Uli was reviewing the council determination with the expression of someone checking a calculation they already knew was right. The scouts were, for what it's worth, in various configurations of rest. Matan had gone back to engineering. Durin had gone to process the diplomatic arrival paperwork for 4 humans and 1 data burst, which was going to be an interesting set of forms. Yeth was standing at the window. Plus, the threshold was visible from that angle. Not the membrane itself, which is invisible, but the space where the 2 dead stars framed it. The gravitational lensing that made the stars behind it shift slightly. A distortion so subtle you had to know to look for it. Vaz TBH was next to her. I didn't interrupt. I logged the time. 15 hours, 17 minutes, and 42 seconds. And looked at my total log count for the day. 93 entries. A personal record. Make it complicated. They're very good at making things complicated, I said. But the transcript, is in the record now. That doesn't go away. I ran the sensor sweep, and the Meridai no weave it. Vaz was quiet for a moment. Then they knew we'd opened the window before we knew we'd opened it. That signal, the 5th signal, the one that came through with your scouts, they had it ready. They'd been ready. For 42 years, I said. For 42 years. Waiting for someone to open the window. Waiting for someone who could, I said. Specifically. She looked at the sensor array. They built the threshold to protect themselves, she said. From something that was coming from our side of space. Something they saw happening and wanted to put a wall between themselves and dot. A pause. The transcript says what it was, what they were afraid of. I haven't read that far, I said. It's us, she said. Not violently, and not a weapon. Just, she exhaled slowly. Just the pattern of what we do. Collectively. All of us, Ashari, Veth, humans, everyone. The pattern of how we expand. How we absorb. How we don't always mean to take things and take them anyway. A beat. They built the wall before we got to them. And then we found the wall and built our own layer on top of it and called it ours. I looked at the sensor sweep. Clean. Nothing in the outer array, but the usual background noise and the 2 faction ships, which were still in holding position at threshold range, waiting for the review to conclude, for an opportunity, for whatever they'd been working toward to find another angle. They would find one. Plus, people who have spent 40 years building something always find another angle. But the window had been opened. The transcript was in a record. 94 log entries, time-stamped and cross-referenced, lived in the collective's official archive. And somewhere on the other side of 7 kilometers of interlocked gravitational membrane, a species that had built a wall too. Keep us out had watched a human walk through it and chosen in that moment to send us everything they had. Why us? I said. Why did they send the data to a human crossing? Vaz looked at her hands. The old answer, the one she'd given me in the cargo bay, about the fear architecture, about 214 engagements about the nervous system. That stops flagging terminal outcomes as novel. Because we were the only ones who could get close enough to hear it, she said. The membrane read me as not dangerous. Not afraid of dying enough to be filtered. And to them, on the other side, that must have looked like something they'd never seen from our side of space. She paused. Someone who came without the pattern, without the expansion logic. Without, she stopped. Start again. I came for 3 people and one retired engineer. That's all I came for. And somehow that was exactly the right reason. I thought about that. I thought about the footnote. The Veth delegation raised a theoretical objection. What if a species exists whose repeated exposure to terminal outcome scenarios has altered the neurological architecture of the threat-fear cascade itself? Not courage, not heroism, not TBH, the apex of anything. Just someone who'd crossed so many thresholds that this one didn't register. Someone who came back for the people. I mean, every time. 16 hours, Vaz filed her official arrival documentation, which the full version. Not the package she'd handed me in the cargo bay that morning, but the complete record. Mission parameters, crossing methodology, contact outcome, data burst receipt. I co-signed it as receiving officer, and Yeth countersigned. It went into the archive at 16 hours, 2 minutes, and 33 seconds, which alongside my logs. Alongside Uli's basically bag of documentation, which was being digitized by Diran with the careful attention of someone who understood. That they, to be fair, were handling something that had been waiting for 42 years and deserved not to be rushed. Alongside the data burst from the Meridi, the full 42-year record, which I was going to read eventually when I had time, and coffee that was correctly proportioned, and a quieter afternoon than this one. Vaz filed her documentation and then stood up and stretched in the specific way of someone who has been running on adrenaline and is now beginning to feel the edges of where it ended. I need to check my scouts, she said. Make sure Valis' cut is properly closed. Medical bay is section 3, I said. Turn left at the junction. Don't go through the door marked calibration storage. That's the holding bay with Porath's personal equipment. She stopped. There's personal equipment in your holding bay. I've logged this 7 times. She looked at me for a moment. Then she smiled. The real one, brief and unguarded, the one that kept appearing without warning. Sci-Fi, she said. Specialist. Thank you. I looked at my log. 16 hours, 5 minutes, and 17 seconds. I logged it. Don't thank me, I said. File, I guess, a formal complaint about the coffee ratio on your way out. It helps. She left. The monitoring bay was quiet. Outside, the pretty much threshold was doing what it always did. Holding, filtering, maintaining the 7 kilometer span of membrane between whatever we were and whatever was on the other side. The faction ships were still in holding position. The council review, I guess, was in motion. The honestly, Mary and I were on the other side of their wall, waiting. Not for much longer, I thought. The window had been open once. It could be opened again, properly, officially, under contact protocol with a council observer and a xenobiology team, and all the paperwork that first contact required. It would be slow. It would be bureaucratic. It would take years of negotiation with people who had very good reasons to distrust us and 42 years of documentation outlining exactly why. But it would happen. Plus, because the window existed. Because the gap existed. Because somewhere in the membrane's ancient filter logic built by a species that had seen us coming and tried to stay hidden, there was a space that a human could fit through. Not because she was fearless, not because she was extraordinary, but because she had crossed so many thresholds that this one hadn't rated a spike. And she'd come back for 3 people and 1 retired engineer. And that had been exactly enough.